So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to February 2026 Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub. I am your host for tonight, or your main host for tonight, and the main facilitator. I'm Dr. Ayodele Ajayi, and along co-hosting with me, Dr. Doka Sawolaro and Buye Kumi. Both of them will be co-hosting and making sure that we we have we both of them will be co-hosting to make sure that all the questions are answered and that everyone has an interesting time. It's good to have you join us, Dr. Adeyemi. Dr. Adeola Adeyemi is also another psychiatrist who is in public space. Many of you would have probably seen her videos. She covers lots of things in terms of mental health. So it's good to have you here, Dr. Adeyemi. Right. So let's do the video first, and then for those who are joining us for the first time, just to give you a taste of what Tripart Care is all about, and then we'll get the show running.
We welcome you all to this month's Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub. In February 2021, Dr. T. Ayodele Ajayi founded Tripart Care, an online emotional well-being hub born out of the need that emerged during the COVID-19 lockdown. Motivated by real-life experiences in our communities, a recognition of a safe space where mental health could be discussed in a needs-led fashion emerged. After over 20 years of public mental health education to Black church communities, Tripart Care was launched to address the unique challenges that the intersection of faith, culture, and mental health presents. Through our events, book clubs, liaisons with churches and leaders, and our WhatsApp groups, we work in bridging the gap between cultural sensitivity, spiritual care, and mental health. Since its inception, Tripart Care has hosted over 50 online workshops, created safe spaces for open conversations on mental health, and partnered with churches to provide training and support. Through Tripart Care workshops, mentorships, consultancy, and a YouTube channel, Dr. Ajayi, who is a consultant psychiatrist and a fellow of UK Royal College of Psychiatrists, along with his team, continues to champion one vision: a community where mental health and spiritual well-being go hand in hand. Provides safe spaces for candid conversations, offer one-to-one support and signposting and training to churches and leaders. By making mental health education accessible and relevant and relatable, we aim to build communities that prioritize mental health, are resilient, and are whole in spirit, soul, and body. Please join us as we enjoy today's Tripart Care.
Right. So that's really what Tripart Care is about. We're an online community, and we provide mental health education in a way that is relatable, in a way that is bite-sized, that takes out all the jargon, and particularly that targets Black church communities. It's not exclusive to Black church communities, but we ensure that the information we provide is scientifically sound, but also culturally appropriate and also applicable to people of faith. Because we know that culture, faith can be barriers to accessing services and getting early intervention if things are not handled in the appropriate way. So I'm quite happy to be hosting along with my colleagues tonight's meeting, and I'm just sharing my slides now, and then we'll get. So really, as I said earlier, that tonight is not just about looking at toxic relationships in our lives. It's also about looking at whether we are being toxic ourselves, because toxicity doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's human beings that create toxicity. And whilst we look at what toxicity can be to other people. We also want to be sure that we are not that maybe there are certain things that are doing that could actually be for other people. So it's important to bear that in mind tonight. So what it's really about looking at harmful relationship patterns and to know what to do about them. Uh, Valentine's Day was only about 2 months ago. Okay. I'm just going to ask my co-host to please help us meet that. Okay, good. So Valentine's Day was only 2 Saturdays ago. And interestingly, I know that there have been a lot of new relationships starting, new engagements, new all sorts of relationships. But the reality is that sometimes when people enter into relationships, they're already the red warning that this is going to be a difficult haul. It's there already, but either because those signs have not been put there on the table, or nobody's ever really talked about it in a way that is and easy to relate to. People still go and ignore those warning signs, and then problems occur in the future. I'm hoping that the information we receive tonight would also help us to really guide other people. I think Pastor Tina has talked about the fact that how to count people in toxic relationships, because no one standard fit or one size fits all
Recording.
advice. Really about it's really about making things applicable to the person who is in the situation. We're going to psychopaths, narcissists. How do you deal with situations? How do you set and maintain boundaries? Really very important, because at the end of the day, that's almost one of the key things, really, when it comes to that. So just a very quick, I'm going to make this short and sweet. Just a very brief profile of myself. I'm a consultant psychiatrist in the NHS, and I'm also an expert witness for sports. And I'm also a pastor in my local church. I'm on the pastoral team, and public mental health education is something that I've been involved in since 2003. And that work has been blessed with features in the BBC Office of Health Improvement and Office of Health Improvement and Disabilities. And I'm also a public speaker and sit on a number of charity boards across spaces. And also, I do also support. We do also have another organization, Mentor to Mission, that supports people from ethnic minority backgrounds to get into medical school. And with the public mental health education work comes lots of publications. And so I'm a columnist for quite a number of publications. I write on mental health, particularly it has to do with culture and has to do with faith. So today is not a consultation. It's not a one-to-one or a group consultation. It's actually a public mental health event, public mental health education event. And this is just to say that the information here is for public consumption, but it's not meant to be used as gospel truth to then apply to one's own mental health in terms of making decisions about mental treatment or mental care. It's very important that if such decisions have to be made, that one consults with the person who is the main provider of one's mental health care. And that could be your consultant psychiatrist, your psychiatric nurse, your counselor, your CBT therapist, or your clinical psychologist, whoever it is that takes a lead on your care. Also to be aware that this event is being recorded, and that when edited off this will lead to our YouTube channel, which one of my co-hosts will be posting very shortly. So we've got a Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing YouTube channel where all the events that we've posted so far have been uploaded onto, and we've got about 105 or so videos on that website, on that channel currently, and that's growing. So that's something that if you don't want to miss any of the videos again, or you want to be aware of what we've uploaded, all you need to do is to subscribe to that channel, and you will be informed whenever you'll be notified. And the other thing to bear in mind is that if you don't want to be featured in the video in terms of tonight, if you don't want to be recognized for any reason, please just by all means use a pseudonym and feel free to either switch on or switch off your camera. So just some housekeeping very quickly. This is meant to be a very safe space. We aim to keep it that sort, and the safety is what we all bring in. So please let's be kind in the comments we make in the way, even if we have different views, let's express that in kind and compassionate ways. Also, sometimes when we discuss things like this, it can be triggering in the sense that they open up old wounds or they open up unhealed wounds, and could then cause somebody to be distressed. If by any means you feel distressed, reach out to either myself or to any of our co-hosts tonight. It's very important that we don't want anyone going away feeling distressed or more in a more distressed state than it came in. We want this place to be a place where people find solace and comfort rather than distress. So confidentiality, whatever happens here, let's keep it here so that everyone can continue to feel able to be vulnerable. I've talked about the Tripart Care YouTube channel, but in addition, we also have an Instagram page. And after talking about the next hour or so, I will then be taking questions and answers. I will then be taking question and answer and comment session. So please, whatever comments you've got, please put that in the chat box, and my co-hosts will make sure that all of that is harvested and that we respond to them. In the course of this evening, as I said earlier, it's both about looking out and looking in. The questions we want to be asking ourselves are, what's the new knowledge I'm acquiring tonight? Why do I need to apply this new knowledge? How am I going to apply this knowledge? Or where am I going to apply it? Because we know that the quicker we apply something, and that's very well known, it's neuroscience, the quicker you apply new knowledge, the quicker you teach it to somebody else, the more deeply ingrained it is for you, and the more you are more likely to recall it, and it becomes part of you. And the other thing to ask ourselves is, who can hinder me, or what can hinder me from applying this new knowledge? And importantly, I think one of the most important questions to answer really, when am I going to take the next possible step? When is the earliest time I'm going to take a step towards the knowledge that I've acquired tonight too? It's almost like an investment. You take out a mortgage, you put down a down payment. So it's almost like a down payment to yourself that information about toxic relationship. I've identified a number of toxic relationships in my life. I've identified a number of ways in which I bring toxicity into my own relationship, and this is what I'm going to do about it. And so it's about taking an immediate step very quickly or making a commitment. And that could be even contacting somebody and asking them to be your accountability partner. So this slide summarizes what I've said so far. That really, when it comes to benefiting from events like this, importantly, take notes. Whichever way you want to take notes, but record something. Make sure that there's something that goes to preserve the knowledge that you gain. Neuroscientists tell us that within the next hour, the information that you get from today, within the next hour, 50% of them will be gone. And within 24 hours, 70% of them will be gone. And by the space of 72 hours to a week, up to 90% of them will be gone if they are not nailed to paper. If they are not been nailed either to a laptop, to an iPad, or to a pad, if they've not been preserved one way or the other. So I encourage you to take notes. I also encourage you to take action quickly, as has been said. But also to find a mate, find an accountability partner, somebody who holds you accountable and responsible to being determined to stay in the course of making sure that this is not just knowledge, it becomes habit, and that it becomes transformational, it becomes behavior. And the other thing is that it's not just about starting, it's also about assessing progress, making sure that how am I doing in 1 week's time? How am I doing in 2 weeks' time? How am I doing in 4 weeks' time? How am I doing in 3 months? Making sure that there's a system in place to check in with myself that what I committed to on 26th February, how am I getting on and progressing with that? Right. So really, what I cover today, anatomy of toxicity. I'm quite interested in words. I like to understand the root meaning of words and where they come from, and how we what modern language. And we're going to do that, but in terms of really looking at what's a toxic relationship, the red flags. Because sometimes, honestly, sometimes everybody sees the red flag except the person who is sitting right in the middle of it. And that's because there's some reasons why that happens. There's also a nuance to that. There are certain spaces where one can get oneself to, particularly in spousal relationships, where where one becomes blinkered, where one becomes blindsided because of certain actions that have been taken. So really, it's about looking at, and then what's narcissism? That you see these days, pop psychology, everybody's a narcissist on Facebook, everybody's a narcissist on TikTok, everybody's a narcissist on LinkedIn and on Instagram. But really, those are very heavy, very clearly defined diagnoses. And the reality is that the bar is very high in making those diagnoses. And really, if diagnosis, as far as we know, should be only be made really by good professionals, and that's psychiatrists and psychologists. But really, the reality is still that there are people who meet that criteria. But very commonly use those labels in a pejorative way. So what exactly does the ICD-10, for instance, ICD-11, but the ICD-11 doesn't define narcissism. But what are the scientific books that really guide us in making diagnosis? That would be the diagnostic statistical manual of version 5 for the United States. What does it really say about narcissistic personality? How do you deal with narcissistic personalities? I know that in the Black culture and also in the faith culture as well, we have an attitude where we say, oh, yeah, just keep enduring it, just keep facing it. But really, when it comes to at some point, do you feel that the red flags are enough, that the signs are there, that what's the framework we can use to really deciding when to walk? And let's remember that this is not just about spousal relationships. It's also about friendships sometimes. It's also about community relationships. Sometimes it's about a toxic bullying burst. At what point do you decide this is time to walk? Because sometimes the only way to resolve the matter is to walk, is to vote with your feet. Um, so how are the structures? What are the frameworks there? And how do you set boundaries? And really, at the end, like we always do, we'll share some resources that are really practical. So let's start with toxic. When you think about the word toxic, what comes to mind? Let's type in the chat, please. Because we are talking about toxic relationships today. What does that even mean? You can see those things look like they've got spines all over them, like they're ready to attack those microorganisms. But what does toxic, when you think about the word toxic, what comes to your mind? What comes to your mind?
Poisonous.
Poison. Yes, thank you. Poison, stress. Yeah, danger. Thank you. Poison. Yeah. Danger, tension. Okay, yeah. Control. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Control. Yeah. Danger, tension, deadly. Yeah. Negativity. Thank you. Thank you. Let's keep them coming. Absolutely. And yeah, that's in fact, in preparation for today, I went because that's the word we've always used. I've never really checked the root word for toxic. Apparently, it's a Latin word. It's from a Latin word that means toxicon. And apparently, toxicon, the poisonous portion that is used at the tip of arrows in the olden in the days of old. They will usually use toxicon was the word that was used for the poison that they used to the tip of arrows, so that the arrows become even more poisonous. You know, it's bad enough that you shoot an arrow at somebody. When you then put poison at the tip, it means that not only does the arrow not only does the arrow injure them or hurt them or is harmful to them, it also carries poison to the death. And that's what toxicity is. Really, a very easy and simple way to think about toxicity is to think about toxicity as something that is harmful, a relationship that is harmful and that is deadly in varying ways. It's a relationship that doesn't add to us but takes away from us. That's what it is. And that really ultimately is progressively taken away. That's really that's a lay way to look at it. To look at toxic relationships is relationships that are poisonous. They are poisonous in various ways. And that could that so thinking about that now, toxic relationships vary from all over. I know when people are thinking about toxic relationships, thinking only of spousal relationships, but the reality is that from the bedroom to the living room to the crash, toxic relationships exist. So it's not just what happens between spouses. It's also what happens sometimes even on the children's playgrounds. It's what happens in the boardroom. It's what happens in places where human beings meet. As long as there's an interaction with human beings, toxicity in relationships will occur. It's just the way it is. And so it occurs in families, it occurs in siblings, it occurs parental relationship can be toxic, friendships can be toxic, community relationships can be toxic, work relationships toxic. And there are three C's. I like to think in alliterations because that's one of the ways I remember things. So I teach in alliterations as well. It's conflict, competition, and control. I think somebody's talked about control already this evening. It's conflict. So think about relationships that are that are always marked with conflict, competition, and control. Any of those three in whichever or in whichever mix, if it's constant, if it's the hallmark of that relationship, then it's worth looking again because it might be toxic. Because if there's constant conflict, competition, and control, that cannot be healthy. That cannot be healthy. If it's the hallmark, it's what exists as the norm, that's the standard, that's the hallmark, that's the general standard, then that cannot be healthy. The other thing is that it's a relationship that depletes rather than adds value. Okay, I can see somebody saying Molly Marvelous. Is that did you did you have a comment or something?
Mistake. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. I was going to say, if you have a comment or a question, please just put it in the chat, and then we'll take all of them together but so that we can then address them at the end. So the bottom line in terms of toxic relationships is that they deplete rather than add. The reality is that there is no relationship where, if relationships are going to be honest, spousal relationships, there will be conflicts, but if it's constant conflict, competition, and control, then it's unhealthy. And eventually you'll find out that's a relationship that takes from you and doesn't add anything to you. Most times, relationships that are healthy are give and take. Sometimes it will cost you a good relationship. Actually, there's nothing bad in relationship costing us because it's the price of love, it's the price of what we pay. Then, if it's constantly taking and taking, then it's something to review. And the other thing is that when you think about your whole being, you need to think about it. It's not just about finances, it's about emotional, it's about physical, it's about mental, it's about social well-being. In what way is that relationship making impact on those aspects of your life? And usually, toxic relationships, they have the way they make you feel. They can make you feel unsupported, misunderstood, maligned, attacked, or drained. You know, I know it doesn't happen to any of us here, but there are people, it's your reality of life, that there are people that after you've come away from having been with them, you feel drained. You feel like, oh wow, I just need a cup of tea, or I need to relax, or I just need to go on a walk because, and there hasn't been any physical exchange or anything. It's just the sheer exhaustion that takes place from having those encounters, and that's because there's neurochemical chaos. When you are in those interactions, there's an unleashing of your fight flight experience or responses, and that will make chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, all your stress hormones to be released in your body. And when that happens, obviously, it will take a toll on the body, and that's why sometimes when you are with people after you leave the place, you just feel drained, and you're wondering, I haven't been running, I haven't been to the gym, I've been with this person, and I feel drained. Sometimes when things are like that, it might be actually that's a warning sign of toxicity. And I'm hoping that as I'm talking about it now, some pennies are dropping for some people. And the other thing is that toxic relationships can be threatening. They threaten your physical, psychological, spiritual, and financial well-being. So in any, it can also be, it's almost like a threat to really the well-being in terms of these relationships. So they really take energy drainers. Yes, absolutely. Um, Right. So what are the red flags? Because, I said the red flags are always there. They are always there. It's just that sometimes people are so blindsided by them that people are so blinkered and so blind spotted that they don't realize them. If there's one of them is lack of support. It's just when there's no holistic support, particularly if it's a spousal relationship. When someone like in a relationship but you feel alone, and that's just because there's no support. When there's presence of toxic emotions, and we are looking at anger, jealousy, strife, resentment, and this is the hallmark. Like I said, sometimes anger is not a necessarily unhealthy emotion if it's dealt with in the right way and if it's expressed appropriately. But if the hallmark of the relationship is toxicity, anger, jealousy, anger all the time is about, then it's something to watch out for. If there's controlling behavior, control is something that has been said because control is one of the weapons that people who in relationships that is used to as a weapon of toxicity. Control. It could be financial control, it could be emotional control, and we're going to look at those even more in more details shortly. So, and then habitually blaming or making putting the other person down, blame them. Or there is a subtle one that is common now in the social media age. You see, people will pass a compliment, but it's a veiled sarcasm. It's veiled sarcasm. It's put across as compliment, but really, when you look at it, it's actually sarcasm. It's also about not being able to pay a compliment without a phrase or a clause to it. So there's never a full compliment. There's always a clause. There's always something that dims the light of that compliment because there's toxicity in that relationship. It's disrespect of the values of that person. Violence, obviously, when there's violence, it's an alarm bell. Dishonesty, lack of transparency, concealment. Sometimes that happens in spousal relationships where one spouse is spending money and the other person doesn't know, or and the other person doesn't know. That sort of thing. It's actually there are warning bells for toxicity. It's also about when constantly that one person or one party is working on eggshells around the other party, and just on remitting stress, or people who that somebody who never apologizes, they're always right, no matter if this person, the argument doesn't end, the situation, it's always resolved only when that person wins. And if that person doesn't win, they would then use they can use emotional blackmail. They could use silence, just silence to until they have their way. When that happens, those are weapons that are used for control. Those are warning signs of toxicity. And sometimes they are there. Like I said, most of the time they're always there, really staring the person in the face, but the person is the only one who doesn't see it. Every other person sees it. And I'm sure that there are so many leaders on this call, leaders in medicine, leaders in the church domain, leaders in the faith realms, leaders, people who are coaches and mentors. It's good to know these things, not just for ourselves, not just for our own the people who are that we are directly responsible for, but for wider community. Because sometimes when we're objective and we can list these things and help people to recognize them, they can see the magnitude of the challenges on their hands and really help them to make their decisions and what to do. So bullying, gaslighting, making that person question their sanity when it's almost like that person is so skilled in manipulation that they make the other person who is the victimized to feel like they're who is the victim to feel like they're the victimizer. Or it's almost like the victim becomes the villain. It's almost in such a way that truth is twisted, and that person begins to sometimes they begin to doubt their own sanity. They don't even know what to believe or what not to believe again. This happens very commonly in domestic violence relationships, in relationships. Love bombing, when it's like, and this is a tactic that people who are narcissistic use often. At the initial part of the relationship, the honeymoon stage, and let's remember that this is not just spousal relationship, it's also friendship, it's also even friendships or sibling relationships, all of those things, any type of relationship. Love bombing is when it's like in the first honeymoon stage, there's so much love and affection and to a fault. It's almost like it's over the top, but it's really so that they can get that person to become vulnerable and to relax, to trust them. As soon as trust has been established, then the venoms begin to come. The toxicity, the poison at the tip of the arrows begin to come out. So, and the whole essence of love bombing, being unleashing gifts, time, affection, presence, is all about getting that person to develop a trust so that they can then reveal their true colors, by which time the trust has been established. Fear and intimidation. Sometimes, of course, that's also one of the weapons that is used in toxic relationships. Particularly, sometimes that happens at work when it's threatening. The other thing is that we also do know very clearly that people who are toxic, perpetrators of toxicity, one of the things they do is to isolate people from other sources of help. So usually, a lot of young people, some young people don't see this. If there's a relationship where, oh yes, is the best thing after sliced bread, but it takes you away from your family, it takes you away from your friends, it takes you away from everyone else, and just wants to have the exclusive right to you. That might look interesting at the initial stage. It might look like, oh, wow, he loves me so much, she loves me so much. But it may also be a warning sign that they want you to themselves to the point in which they've taken you away from every source of help, so that when they begin to show their true color, it's difficult to get away. Because you've burnt all your bridges. In fact, sometimes people who, one of the weapons will be they will help you to burn the bridges. Help you to, and then splitting is about really causing, it's almost like knocking people's heads against each other, benefiting from chaos. And this is well orchestrated, well planned, and it's with a view to have the upper hand. Splitting is about the colloquial way to talk about splitting is divide and rule. So you divide so that you can rule. And sometimes it's about, like I said, causing chaos between maybe two close siblings, because that person who is the spouse of one of them really wants to take them away from every support from that sibling, because they know that that sibling is the voice of reason that can help them. Or it could be causing chaos in friendship groups because they want this person to themselves, in order to be able, in order to take them away from voice of reason. So, and also sometimes it's martyrdom. that person becomes a martyr. They portray themselves as the victim when in actual sense they are the ones perpetrating chaos and they are the ones they are the ones who are the offenders. Guilt tripping, making the other person feel guilty, saying things in a way that makes that person feel guilty. For instance, when you decide to put down boundaries, then they begin to say, "Oh, you don't love me," or sometimes even people threaten to do things to themselves, threaten to sometimes even threaten to harm themselves or do such things. Sometimes it could actually be guilt tripping. And I'm not saying that's things about if people say they want to harm themselves, it shouldn't be taken seriously. It should be utmostly taken seriously. But I'm saying that also sometimes guilt tripping, people could use anything to try and guilt trip the other person. If you leave me, my life is going to be over. If you leave me, I'm going to do such and such. When in actual sense, they are being toxic. And that's just their way of holding on to that person. Um, so let's look at in more practical ways. Like I said, narcissistic personality is it's a very, very narrowly defined definition. The classification, the International Classification of Disease, 11th edition, has actually um, it's adopted a different approach in terms of defining personality and problems personality. Um, but the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is the American book, it's almost like the American Bible for diagnosis of mental conditions. They've been very clear about how to decide how to make a diagnosis of narcissistic personality. To start with, somebody needs to fulfill 5 of these 9 criteria to be deemed to be narcissistic personality. So the stakes are really high, and I've tried to put all of them into an E because it's easy to remember that way. Like I said, I like this alphabet because it's very easy for you to then remember them. Exaggeration of achievements. Without saying much, I think that currently in the world stage, narcissistic personality is not so difficult to define. For those who follow world news, I think it's not difficult to define now because on the world stage, there's one playing out very clearly before us every day. So I think those who know. However, um, so exaggerated achievements, they are the people they need to be grandiose about themselves. They need to put flavor to what they've achieved, and in terms of their talent, in terms of their abilities. That's exaggerated achievements. It's also engrossment in fantasies. They have fantasies about their own personal achievement. It's almost like they live in a world that is different, where they are king and where their world is ruled. And exceptions in association. So they carry themselves in a way that make them look down on other people and also portray that there are people who are beneath them in terms of association. So that's exceptions in association. Expectation of admiration. They expect to be admired, and there's a need. In fact, the ego of the narcissist is fed on admiration of other people. And when that's not forthcoming, they can lash out in several ways. A sense of entitlement where almost they feel like the world owes them, and it's an unreasonable expectation that is not met by their qualifications, it's not met by what they are bringing to the table, it's not met by what they are delivering. They just expect that, they just feel that the world owes them. There's also exploitation. Exploitation is another one, that they will use all of these tactics that we've talked about: bullying, guilt tripping, love bombing, any of those things to exploit other people, particularly people who are vulnerable. They will take advantage of other people, and their ego, the world radiates around them in terms of they can be arrogant, they can be haughty, and it's because it's almost like the world just radiates around that person in their world. And they are envious. Not only do they feel that other people envy them, they also envy other people. That's usually one of the features. And empathy, very hallmark, lack of empathy. So those are the 9 characteristics. Classically, somebody has to have 5 of those to meet the criteria for narcissistic personality. Just to tick it off the box now, people often ask that, why, how does somebody end up being a narcissist? There are two psychodynamic formulations or two side thinkings that are popular. One of them is that actually the person who is ended up as a narcissist is actually a victim of a very critical or hypercritical parent, and that when they were growing up, they had so much criticisms, they were told they were no good, that so much that now that they are trying to rebuild their own image, they're gone the other side, where it's almost like the victim has then become the victimizer. The victim has become the person who is now, and in the process of doing that, they overdo it. And of course, the other one is that when children are raised with a sense of entitlement where there are no boundaries, they then grow up feeling that the world owes them. Those are the two, just simply putting it in a very simple, simplistic way that everyone can understand. Those are the two ways. And I think they have implications for parents, grandparents who are raising children, for people who in our community who have responsibility for children. Because really, every day, the way we interact with our children is actually a template that we are setting for their future mental health. We are creating a script, not only for their current life, but importantly for their future life. And that could also include a script for their future relationships. So really very important. Thank you for all those who have been writing in there. I can see that the chat is buzzing. We'll come to that. So self-care when dealing with narcissism. It's the first thing I think in dealing with narcissism is to realize that you are dealing with a narcissist. And I'm hoping that some of those features that we've listed will help you to be able to see that actually this is not just somebody, this is narcissism I'm dealing with. Because if you don't recognize it, then you might continue to fall prey. So acknowledge that you can't change anyone. You see, there are people who continue to be in that narcissistic relationship, hoping that they are going to be that staying in there is going to change the person. Narcissism is deep. It didn't happen overnight, and it's probably not going to go away overnight. In fact, we do know that sometimes actually when a narcissist goes out, it's almost like it tears apart first everything that it held true. And sometimes that can be really very difficult. So to hang in there as the savior or the messiah, having a messiah syndrome that one is going to deliver, save that person, it's at that person's peril most times. Stay calm and don't play the game. Begin to recognize what the tactics are and don't just play, because when you involve in that sort of emotional tussle with a narcissist, they are professionals and anyone else is amateur. So not playing the game is very important. Setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. And setting and maintaining healthy boundaries could also mean that you are enlisting the support of other people to help you to maintain those boundaries. It's also about where you engage. So if you are dealing with a narcissist, for instance, maybe you don't want to engage on phone calls. Maybe you only want to engage through voice messages, maybe voice notes. Maybe you only want to engage through text messages. Maybe you only want to engage through emails. Maybe you really don't want to engage in a way that makes you feel that vulnerable. It's about choosing how much you engage that is safe for you and that preserves your own emotional well-being. So those are things to think about when one is dealing with somebody who is narcissistic. And the thing is, don't ignore the warning signs, because let's also remember that this not only are people who are narcissists can also be charming, particularly at the initial stage. Let's remember that I talked about love bombing, for instance. Know when you've exhausted all reasonable options and efforts. And we are going to look at a framework that I feel it's a reasonable one to use to assess the situation going forward. So know when it's time to turn your back and go run for your own sanity. Sometimes, and this is the reality, unfortunately, that sometimes geographical separation might be the only option. Sometimes. I'm not saying it's the only one all the time, but sometimes geographical separation is the only option to preserve not just the emotional well-being of that person, but also it might be actually the emotional well-being of maybe the children that are involved or other people that are involved, but also it might also be the only option in preserving that person's life, particularly if violence is involved. I know very often we shy away from those things because we don't like to talk about them, but sometimes in reality, that's the only way. So what are the health risks of toxicity? There are lots and lots of research studies have shown that really when one is constantly in a toxic relationship, I think some of these figures I'm quoting was the British Civil Service study. This was about toxic work relationships, and they found out that there was 34% increased risk of heart problems. Prolonged conflicts led to people who are in prolonged conflicts, who were exposed to prolonged conflict, tended to report that their general health was less in terms of their general well-being, and they tended to report more health conditions. Chronic stress, which is associated with toxicity, is also associated with immunocompromise. The immune system, the fighters of the body get depleted, and when they get depleted, that person would then be prone to several disease, illnesses, colds and coughs, and things that would intercurrent infections or things that would usually not have taken that may not have occurred might begin to occur because when you're under stress, I'm sure that you know that when you're under stress, we then begin to get we tend to get more cold coughs and all of those things. Earlier death of both partners. There is now we know that if it's a chronically conflicting relationship, there's a risk of higher death of earlier death. So life expectancy is compromised. And also, we also do know that there can also be a perpetuation of harmful lifestyles. For instance, things like obesity, alcohol use. If, for instance, one spouse is that way, or a friendship group is like that, that can be of a damaging effect to the other people who are in that group. There's lots of research also showing about how you tend to mirror the social habits of people that you're in close relationships with. So really, now, out of all of those, one of the ones that really strikes a chord the most, and that is one of the loudest alarm bells, is the generational impact of remaining in toxicity. And now I'm talking about domestic violence, I'm talking about spousal toxic relationships. We do know statistics shows that research shows that boys who witness their dads being perpetrators of violence in spousal relationships are 50 to 60 times, they have 50 to 60% increased risk, or 1.5 to 2 times increased fold of becoming perpetrators themselves. So really, like I said earlier, that we are writing the script of the future of children by the way we interact with them and by the things that we do in their presence. Girls who witness their moms being victims of violence by spouses are also 6 times more likely themselves to become victims, particularly of sexual violence. So it's almost like they see their moms being abused that way, and pre-programmed, they begin to attract abusive partners themselves when they grow up without realizing it. And it's almost like they can't get away. And that's why it's important for us as well, for people who are, for leaders. Sometimes you think, why can't she just break away from him? Why can't he just break away from her? It's more than that, because the script was already written long before she met him, while she was still in her dad's home, while she was still in his father's home. Long when they hadn't even realized that they were making decisions. The script was being written. So it's just now being played out. And that's why it's important to go back to the template and clear the template first. And that's why for some people cannot just believe, why can't they get away from that toxic relationship? It's not always that easy. The other thing we do know is that there's research also showing for those who say, oh, yeah, endure it and stay by it. Yeah, I know in certain Black community cultures, we say, oh, yeah, the woman endures because she's just staying there for her children, just staying there. However, what the research shows is that children who are raised by single supportive parents actually fare better than children who are raised in a chronically stressful and conflicted parental relationship. I will say that again. That children who are raised by a stable single parent, maybe for one reason or the other, that's the choice they make. That's the choice that spouse makes because they want to protect their children from toxicity. Those children actually fare better than the ones who say, we are going to endure this, and the children continue to get exposed to the toxicity of parental discord and parental conflicts. The children with two parents who are always at loggerheads, who are always with conflict, fare a lot poorer. And some of the things that are associated with children who grew up in those situations are anxiety, learning difficulties, depression, aggression. They become perpetrators themselves. And also, those type of situations are deemed as high impact adverse childhood experiences. So really, it's important to have those facts when we have those conversations, particularly as leaders, because I always say that leaders are powerful people. We carry more influence than we sometimes recognize or sometimes admit. It's important to be armed with those facts uh, in helping people to be objective about the chaos that they might be dealing with in their lives and what decisions that they might want to be making. And just to say that it's not a given that somebody who has been exposed, a boy who has seen his dad being violent would automatically become violent. It's just a risk. If that boy then has other people in their lives who balance them, who are able to help them to make the right choices and to make decisions appropriately, they're actually at less risk. The other thing we do know is that if that boy holds their father as their role model, they are more likely to go down that same route that the dad went. If that boy, for instance, also believes in male dominance, where and he's been allowed to normalize that violence is a normal thing, they are more likely to become perpetrators. So the point I'm trying to make is that the fact, if we see children as people who are community leaders, people who are involved in community work, if we see a child is at risk, we then know that there's work on hands to try and compensate, to try and help that child to understand what's normal from what's abnormal, so that they don't go down the same route that they've seen at home. But these are things that really, they say knowledge is power. So it's important to bear those things in mind. Right. Okay. This relationship assessment skill, this was by it was initially put together by Hendrick 1988. That's to really assess relationships on a scale. It was initially done for spousal relationships, but it's now applicable to other forms of relationship. These are type of things that when it's apparent that maybe somebody that we are supporting or somebody in our social circle is in toxicity, rather than nag them or try to convince them. These are skills that we can walk through with them to help them to see objectively why we are concerned. Because when things appear on paper, when you can put numbers down, when you can put facts and figures down, the reality sinks in better. So rather than talk about, oh yeah, I just don't feel comfortable, it doesn't treat you well. Doing an exercise like this can help the person to actually see on paper that really is this the future that I really want. So I wonder what our thoughts are on this. I think I suppose maybe the answer, people know the answer already anyway. Being in an intimate relationship is linked to longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. Do we think it's true or false? just being in any intimate relationship, spousal relationship. Yeah, I'm talking about spousal relationships now. That being in that type of relationship guarantees longevity, good health, and better life expectancy. What do we think? Lots of comments here. Okay, true.
Not
Okay, true.
necessarily.
Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. It's not necessarily. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think that's first out the line. Yes, not necessarily. It's when one is in a spousal relationship that is healthy, that's when we get the benefits of longevity, good health, and better life expectancy and quality of years. If it's a conflicted and conflicting relationship and a toxic one, the opposite actually happens. So it's important to bear that in mind that actually the opposite happens when. So being in a spousal relationship it's not just about being in a spousal relationship. It's really about being in a supportive, healthy relationship. That's when we get the benefits from it. So very often this comes up when the reality is that the penny is dropping for some people, or maybe there are people that we know and we can think, oh wow, that person I can see this is beginning, the dots are joining up, the puzzles are coming together. What do? Sometimes it's really about staying and really working on it. Somebody who has an alcohol addiction, for instance, the spouse has an alcohol addiction or gambling addiction or pornography addiction or substance misuse or even financial impropriety, they can go for help, they can seek help. So I think it's important to balance that. I'm not saying that bail or run at the first sign of trouble. That's not what I believe. That's not what I advocate. I'm saying that actually that if that ever happens, then it should be something that is considered as a last resort when all effort has been attempted and there is no other way to deal with the toxicity, and particularly, of course, if the future and the life of children are at stake. So staying to really make it work, trying to help get the other person help is always the most sensible thing to do. Sometimes it's also about, whilst that's being done, to secure one's own boundaries. And we're going to come to boundary setting very quickly. And then, of course, sometimes it's really about, sometimes it's about calling a cool-off period to really maybe to give that person time to really address the situation. I always say this, and it's true, that every man that I've seen in trauma-informed coaching have come because they had an ultimatum, and it was always from their wives. It was always from their wives. It was the wives that said, I've done such and such and such. The last 15 years, I've been waiting for you to sort out yourself. Or the last 20, 25 years, I've been waiting for you to address this addiction problem, to address this anger management issues. And you are not doing anything. If in 6 months, I don't see a step forward, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to do such and such. And that's when people then seek help. It doesn't have to get to that point. But I'm saying that sometimes it works. Because when those men then come into trauma-informed coaching, a lot of them, 1 year on, the person who comes into the coaching is not the person who emerges on the other side. Their life is totally overhauled, and things and some of them will say, "Oh, wow, I didn't think my life could be disorganized. I didn't think that I could begin to make right choices for my life, and that we're in a better place than we've ever been." So sometimes calling that ultimatum is not always a bad thing, but sometimes severance is the only way forward. Like I said, I want to be very, very clear about that I'm saying that severance is right at the bottom of the pile when every other thing has been tried and tested long enough and it fails. That's when I feel that severance will be something to consider, and not without being it must be done not flippantly but very cautiously. And of course, the other thing is when life is at stake. If life is at stake, life of the children, life of one of the spouses, then it might be if not severance, at least a period of cool off to allow that person to get help while somebody else's life is not sacrificed in the process. So I think it's very important to be very clear about that. I don't want people going away and thinking, oh, Dr. Ayodele said, just bail at the first things. As soon as you see red flags, run for your dear life. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I advise people to do. That's not what I would ever advocate. I think that help should be sought and fences should be mended as much as possible. And what are the frameworks? What's the framework you could help for somebody maybe who's facing domestic violence or somebody who is facing toxicity? How can you help them to think through the process and to help them to make decisions? I call it the 5 A's to see 5 A's. Awareness. Is the offender aware that they are being toxic, that they are pornographic, for pornography habits, that they are drug addiction, their alcohol addiction, their unbridled anger, their financial impropriety, that's having an impact on your relationship? Are they even aware at all? Because sometimes they are not even aware. So that's the first step. Is that person aware? And if they are aware, then let's move on to the next step. Okay, they are aware that there's a problem. Are they acknowledging the impacts that their behavior is having on that relationship? That actually or even it might even be that the fact that I'm saying that my seeing somebody else either emotional or actual infidelity is affecting the integrity of our relationship. Is that person acknowledging the impact of their actions? So yes, they are aware, but are they? So they may say, because somebody might say, "Oh yes, I'm aware that I have an anger issue, but that's my problem. It's got nothing to do with you. It's not affecting you. So you deal with it. It's your business. You are the one that's responding that way." So are they acknowledging the impact it's having on us? The other thing, after acknowledgement, there are several people who they've acknowledged for the last 10 years, but they've not accepted responsibility. Responsibility is, yes, I have an anger issue. It's making this the home making the home an unsafe place for our children. It's threatening to your physical, emotional, and mental well-being, and I accept responsibility to do something about it. It's not your problem. You are not the one that needs to change and accept me the way I am. I am the one that needs to change and get help. That's acceptance of responsibility. That's another further level on. And the next thing is about action, really, because there are several people who are arrested at the responsibility stage. I accept responsibility, but I've accepted responsibility since 10 years ago, and I've never lifted a finger to do anything about it. I'm accepting responsibility by going for counseling. I'm accepting responsibility by joining Narcotic Anonymous. I'm accepting responsibility by joining AA. I'm accepting responsibility by joining an accountability group. So I'm saying I am actually taking action. It's not just lip service that, oh, yes, I need to do something about it. But I've been saying I need to do something about this gambling problem for the last 10 years, and I haven't done anything. So action. And that's the thing. So many people also take the first step, but don't back it up with the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. And 1 month down the line, 2 months down the line, they forgot they ever took action. Accountability. Who is going to hold me accountable? Is it my pastor? Is it my childhood friend? Who is going to hold me accountable that I'm not just taking one step of action, I'm going to back it up with another and another and another and another until we really see change. So those are the 5 A's, really. It's about awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance of responsibility, taking action, but using accountability to maintain that action until there's a change. And that's the framework that you can use for everyone. I find for most people, you can use it in coaching, you can use it in mentoring, you can use it for people who maybe it's that person who comes and says, actually, I think I'm the toxic person. And I really am committed to change. That structure can be used to help them to see where they are in the process. Where exactly am I in this process of really getting help and assessing my commitment as well. So toxic relationship, the recovery plan, confide in a supportive other about your decision. There are people who are dying in toxicity and they don't say anything about it. They are keeping mute lips and nobody is knowing, but and that's good for the offender. Because as long as people don't know, they don't seek help, there's no second opinion, and nobody is able to tell them that really what you're going through is not normal. Because that's the other thing. Sometimes people are in toxicity because there's no benefit of a second opinion. They don't even know that they're facing toxicity. And least appropriate support in severance. So if it's domestic violence and all has been sought and it's now apparent that that person needs to live for their dear life, professional support is important. Knowing the domestic violence and the local domestic violence and women's refuge, all of those things are important. Social services support, all of those things are important, and it must not be done impulsively, because if it's done impulsively, that person's life may be at risk. So it's important to plan those things and to plan them in a way that is also safely done, because sometimes when the offender realizes that that person is planning their exit, their life could also be at risk. So suicide, homicide, suicide is quite a common. It's not an uncommon thing when people think, oh yeah, if I can't have you, then you wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be here. So it's important to bear all of those things in mind, that things must be done. Um, yes, and I think it's also important to be balanced, that it's not just men who are perpetrators. Men are also victims, and that's even worse, because when men are victims, they find it more shameful. You know, think about it. In most of our cultures, it's a shameful thing for a man to be a victim of domestic violence, but the reality is that it does happen. So it's both ways. I think it's important to be balanced about that. Appraise the damage. Sometimes it's about appraising the damage, and I hope some of the tools we've shared will help people to appraise the damage and count the loss, and really make a decision. And then the recovery journey starts in terms of really renewing your thinking. Domestic violence and toxic relationships are damaging. They damage the very fiber of what people believe about themselves. And that means that healing might just need to begin. And that healing could be good for counseling, for therapy. It might mean seeing a psychologist. It might mean for going for parallel counseling, because it's almost like rebuilding one's image again. Uh, so I'm going to quickly whisk through boundaries. Really, boundaries are about the structures that we put in place. It could be financial, it could be physical, it could be emotional, to prevent us from harm. And sometimes boundary means being able to say no with confidence. When one is like, they are the physical, emotional, and mental limits that we establish to protect ourselves. They are like invisible fences around our personal, emotional, sexual, work, digital, and social spaces. It's almost like, this is how far we are going to go, this is how far I'm going to allow. And anything other than that, then this is what's going to happen. And healthy boundaries, it starts with actually making up your mind what healthy boundary is, what is safe for me, this is how far I'm going to go. I mean, for instance, somebody might say, the day you lift up your hand to hit me, that's a non-negotiable. That's a line crossed, and I wouldn't continue to endure that. Um, and there are different benefits of boundary setting, healthy boundaries. They preserve our energy. They help us to feel fulfilled in ourselves and to use our energy to do the things that are important to us and that make us fulfilled. Um, and like we said, it's not just about emotional, it's physical, it's sexual as well. Healthy boundaries are a key aspect of self-care. Um, so it's really a key aspect of self-care. And when we don't have healthy boundaries, we get drained, and we can get resentful. Not being able to say no can begin to make us feel resentful, because we begin to feel used, we begin to feel undermined, we begin to feel taken for granted if we're not able to say no. And then it can also compromise productivity. So these are 12 signs that you might be lacking in a healthy boundary: when somebody is a people pleaser, when one is habitually taken for granted, when one is resentful, or it's almost like almost like test yourself for, oh, I've said yes again when I really meant no, and you begin to beat yourself up about that. That might be an indication that healthy boundaries are lacking. When one is an oversharer, or when one overshares, but also the other part is when one is has an intimacy phobia. So one is not able to relax and get into at least form intimacy with other people. So a fear of rejection and abandonment, that might also be all of those obviously point to something that is deep, and usually there's a childhood pattern, something's been, trauma has happened somewhere. Harley's therapy boundaries and test, that's really something we can use as well to help us to assess ourselves in terms of our boundaries. When I think about saying no to somebody, how do I feel? Do I feel afraid or calm? You know, if no is a deal breaker for us all of the time, we say yes to everything that is asked of us, then it might really be that the healthy boundaries are lacking. So setting healthy boundaries really, I think we've spoken more. We've covered quite a bit of that, but just to also say that if somebody is having problems with setting boundaries, they need to give themselves some grace as well, because people don't do something. It's usually something that's happened in the past that has made them conflict averse. So how do you set healthy boundaries? It's about clarity. What exactly do I want? And communicating that clearly in a rational way. This is what I want. This is what I expect. And these are the possible things that could go wrong if that's not adhered to. And being willing to enforce those boundaries. The whole essence of having boundaries is to enforce them. So if you are going to make any boundaries, be sure that if you are going to be willing to enforce them as well, because if you don't, then it sends a message that the boundaries are just there, and more likely than not, they'll be taken for granted. So it's also about consistently setting that boundary. It's like children. Children, if you say, "Oh yeah, no fizzy drinks for you," children will try and try. They will try all sorts to see whether they can negotiate, whether they can. But when they know that it's consistently maintained, they will then give it. And for adults, it is like that as well. Because the reality is that the reason why some people are toxic is because those boundaries were not actually put in place for them when they were younger. And that's why they will feel entitled and do some of the things that does happen. So checking enlisting the support of others is also always very important. So usually this is a framework in terms of saying no and not feeling guilty about it, and not saying it in a harsh way. Open with gratitude and appreciation. I mean, for instance, somebody sent me a message. I think it was on one of the social media platforms. They wanted me to do something that I really didn't. I could, yeah, it wasn't really something I could commit to. My time budget didn't allow it. So I just said, thank you very much. I really appreciate you asking my view, which I did. I mean, out of all the people on that platform, you've reached out to me. So I'm not taking that for granted. Thank you for thinking to even ask me. But how about if rather than myself, I'm giving you a phone call, or how about if we do this by messages? I can type my response at a time when I'm relaxed and I want to do it. Not that I'm going to then dedicate 1 hour of my time talking, devoting to that project, which may not really be justifiable. So it's about also negotiating. I'm being very succinct and clear in my refusal. This is not something I can take on right now. I might offer an alternative. For instance, in that case, a phone call was requested. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not able to commit to a phone call. I'm not able to commit to a phone call. Thank you for asking my view. I really appreciate it. I'm not able to commit to a phone call currently, but we can have a chat. We can exchange messages. That's not going to take a chunk of my time. It can be done at my own time, and it's not going to encroach into my already strict time budget. Keeping my values and my priorities in mind. And then sometimes it's about role playing. Sometimes in coaching and mentoring, you may need to actually do that role play, or do it in front of a mirror, about getting familiar with practicing to say no, or enforcing boundaries. So our boundary setting is not easy for most people, and that's because sometimes it's culture, sometimes it's faith, it's just, or sometimes it's upbringing. So everybody wants to be liked. Sometimes it's because we don't set boundaries because we haven't had good examples or role models of boundary setting in our own lives earlier on. Sometimes it's because in our cultures it's unacceptable to say no, you say yes to everything. Sometimes it's about the fear of being stigmatized. There are all sorts of things that cause problems with boundary setting. So this is, I think, the second to the last slide or something, before we start looking at just the typical Tripart care slides. So I just want you to take time now to reflect on all of the things I've been saying, reflecting on your relationships, whether is there anywhere you are perpetrating toxicity or actually accommodating toxicity, and at what cost? At what cost? I suppose sometimes when we're able to reflect on at what cost is this, what's this costing me, that helps us to actually take action, because suddenly we can see the impact that this is not just what's happening now, it's at what cost, what's the price I'm paying for this. So those are some resources. National Domestic Violence Line, that's the mental advice line. 16personalities.com, it's really about knowing yourself and knowing what you're bringing to the table. This is a very good book, actually. Boundaries, How to Say No and Take Control of Your Life by Henry Cloud. Really, it's one of the classics in terms of boundary setting. And that's a podcast, it talks about boundary setting as well. Really brilliant podcast on Spotify. This Dr. Ramani, she's a clinical psychologist. I think she's based in America, and her theme is narcissistic personality, and she's got lots and lots and lots of video on that on her YouTube channel. So those are, and of course, we've shared some of the resources. There's the Harley Street Boundary Test, and there's also the Hendrick relationship assessment. So I'm going to whisk through this in 2 minutes because I want us to be able to comment and ask questions, and I'm sure that I can see that the chat is buzzing. So those are the things that Tripart Care offer. We offer trauma-informed one-to-one executive coaching to men. So specifically to men. Workplace mental well-being consultancy, keynote public speaking, and we can come and train your church workforce on mental health. And those are the different trainings that we are able to deliver. And those are the things that are on the horizon. I'm quite pleased that last year we couldn't do our mental training for Christian leaders, but on Valentine's morning, that took place, and that was quite an exciting event. The feedback has been very inspirational. It's been gripping. Lots of insightful comments that people have made. Some people are taking action, and I'm really super excited. The next one, mark your diaries, is Saturday, 19th September 2026. So you've got about 6 months to plan for that. We are going to be doing something really exciting as well. I'm particularly looking forward to that. I think it's going to be something on self-care and stress management for people who are in ministry, people who are Christian leaders, because that's also something that we often neglect, but we can only do so much. So the emotional intelligence course for engaged and newly married couples is still on the cards. It will happen. Let's bear that in mind as well. And in the future, we are going to, one of the things that came out of Valentine's Day, the Valentine's Day meeting for Christian leaders, was a need for there to be a safe space where Christian leaders can come together and just like a support group. And that's something that we are working on and will happen imminently by God's grace. So those are the future dates. It's a possibility that in June, being men's mental health and men's month, if it doesn't happen in June, then it will be in November. We are going to be looking at 7 masked faces of male trauma. You know, sometimes men present with features of trauma and we think it's bad behavior. Some of the things that men are criticized about, including violence in modern day society, some of them are actually masked, concealed forms of trauma. And I'm really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to hosting that event, talking about it. But also very shortly, I'm going to be writing an article on that for Keep the Faith magazine. So the men's month, the June edition of Keep the Faith magazine, that's what I'll be writing on the 7 masked faces of male trauma. So that's our Instagram page. Please do like it, whatever we do on Instagram, and follow us. And that's the WhatsApp group for young people, or it's become a generic WhatsApp group. And that's a generic WhatsApp group for Christian leaders. So if you click on any of them, take a photo of those, you'll be taken to the group. And that's the Tripart Care Book Club. The book club is really thriving, eminently handled by Dr. Awolaro. Dr. Awolaro is doing a good job of that. And the book that is currently being read is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, a classic on trauma care. And we've got a number of other books lined up. One of them is Why Am I Like This? By Kobe Campbell. It's really it's almost like an autobiography of a Christian lady who went through trauma herself, and now she's emerged on the other side and become a counselor herself. So those are the contact details for us and for Tripart Care. Those are my personal details, and Tripart Care has also got an IG Instagram page now. Right. Thank you for listening.